Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots and welcome to the much anticipated video based on the Scalextric's C052, the original Ford Escort Mark I. And I know it's been a long time in the coming, but here we are. Now there is a reason why it's been so long, and that is because every time I buy a body, it's just too good to use. And I've got to say a special thank you to Mac, our good friend of the channel, who finds me these cars, because without him, I'd be really struggling to find a car. But it has presented a problem, because Mac is so good at finding really good cars. Every time he sends me one, it's just too good to use and I can't. And I'll show you the sort of sequence of events that happened. So this is actually going to be the Ford Escort I'm going to be doing a mega build on. One with insanely wide tyres, really good chassis. I'm going to lighten the body and do everything that's feasible to it before it becomes a completely bespoke build. So this is the car, and I'll show you. This is the car that Mac originally got me. Now, as you can see, we've got all the parts. We've had this for quite some time. And here is the body that Mac sent me. And when he sent me this, I thought, I can't use that because this car's going to have a repaint, a nice repaint, but it's going to have a repaint anyway. I thought, that's just too good to use. So I postponed the project. I then asked if I could have another car later on, and Mac produced this car. Now this one turned up, and again, it was absolutely beautiful. Better than this one. As I hold side by side, you might be able to tell there's a little bit of yellowing in this original car than this complete car. Now, this car was so good. I just lightly restored it, got it back to perfect running condition, and this is the one that I run on that small figure of 8 trackers, the drift car that I may have shown you a few times. You may have seen it in the Retro Power video where one of the owners is driving it around the track. He loved it. But this car goes really well around that, and I will not change this one from stock. It's just so nice. So that delayed the project still further. And then the other day I said to Mac, can you find me another body? And he did. I said, not as good as the other ones. So he found me this body. Now, to be honest with you, this body is still excellent, which is what I want. I don't want to be dealing with a horrible body. So it's an excellent body. But as you can see, it's a little bit worse, if worse is the right word, not really. A little bit worse than this one, which is good. But it's definitely a long way off of my original car, or my whole car just here. So we're going to have to draw the line somewhere. I think we'll draw the line at this one. So this one will be getting a very light repaint. It's going to be in white with the original stickers and everything else, or water slides, and we're going to build up this car in this video. And I've got all the parts to do that with to this one. So let's get you on my table and let's get cracking into this third body to make into a mega Escort. Whoa, I've got a better idea. Why don't we put a decent set of Scalextric's rear tyres on this car so we can run it round Crow Valley to see what she looks like and get a base time for a track run. Then we can go to the bench and start building up a super Escort. Okay, so here is the beautiful Escort Mark I body that we're going to start with. And as you can see, it's in excellent condition, but it is slightly yellowed, as you can see from where the old sticker used to be on the bonnet. And there's a little bit of yellowing down the side there. Now I can absolutely deal with this. It's a lovely white base for what will be a white paint job. And as you can see, we've got a really clean standard chassis underneath, in excellent condition, nothing broken and nothing damaged. So this is an excellent place to start. So there is the chassis, and as you can see, we've got a really nice set of front and rear bumpers. Now we're not entirely sure if these are reproduction ones or not, but even if they are reproduction, makes no difference to me. They're still absolutely perfect for the job, and they're very, very nice. As we can see, we've got a really nice grille, we've got really nice lights on there, all nice and shiny still, nothing worn off. So this is going to be a really great donor for a nice clean white paint job, and I hope that you guys appreciate that this is going to be done in sympathy and not wrecked. So this entire project is really just going to be a case of bolting parts on, and anybody is going to be able to do it, and that's the point of this video, to improve the performance of this car in a way that anybody can do it. So let's have a look at the parts that I've got for this car. So I went shopping at Pendle Slot Racing and I bought all the parts that I need for this build. And the first part I've got is a brass bossed 28 tooth slotted crown gear and a 5.5mm diameter 8 tooth pinion gear for my motor. Okay, so the next part to this build are these staff slots 1/2 mil offset bearings. Now I wanted to lower the centre of gravity on this car just a little tiny bit, but not too much. If you lower it down to about 1 mil, you really need to start thinking about a 1 mil offset crown gear. And they are sometimes more difficult to get, sometimes. So I thought I would keep this build nice and simple and keep the standard offset gear, but use 1/2 mil offset bearings. And you can do that quite safely with a standard gear. So that's what we went for, the Staff's 1/2 mil offset eccentric bearings. As you can see, there's a little bit of offset there. So they will fit nicely in this car, and it'll get the centre of gravity down by about 1/2 millimetre. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. And to power this car, I've decided to go with the Pendle Slot Racing AC4 20,000 RPM S-Can motor. These are great motors, 20,000 RPM as opposed to the stock 18,000. These have got great torque, great top speed, and a really good power range, and I like them a lot, and they'll go really well in this car. Being as it's not going to be a high performance car, this small motor here has got more than enough power for all home tracks. And in terms of axles, we got this pack of Slotting Plus axles, and they are 55mm long. They will need cutting down, but these will be absolutely perfect for the job. Great quality axle in hardened steel. Okay, so the wheels. I'm using these Pendle Slot Racing 13-inch alloy wheels because they're beautiful wheels. They run really true, and I've had a lot of success with these wheels. Now the rear wheels, I'm using these 8.4mm wide wheels, which basically simulate the original wheels found on the original car. So these are absolutely just a straight up replacement for what came originally with the Escort. With the front wheels, I've actually gone for the 6.3mm wide wheels as opposed to the fully wide wheels which come standard on the car anyway, because these wheels look a little bit more scale-like and give the car a bit more of a reasonable look on the front end rather than outrageously large wide track tyres, which you really don't want on a Scalextric car. The front wheels are really only there to hold the front of the car up in the two front corners. We don't need width. So the thinner the better really, but I didn't go for the really thin Pendle wheels because they are possibly a little bit thin and might look a little bit weedy on this car. So these 6.3mm wheels should do the job really, really nicely. So in terms of tyres, I've gone for these. They are the Pendle Slot Racing standard tyres that they use on their alloy wheels. And these particular ones are in the F22 rubber, and this is the standard tyre to fit the standard 13-inch 8.4mm wide alloy wheel. But the front tyres are these particular ones, and these have got a very slight tread on them. These are again in F22 compound. They are to fit the 6.3mm front wheels, but they are a little tiny bit bigger in terms of diameter than the rear tyre. As you might be able to tell there, they're a little bit wider, not much, really only the thickness of the tread itself. So what I'll do before I end up running this car on the track is I'll take the tyre truer to these front tyres and I'll bring them down to exactly the same diameter as the rear tyres, and that will bring balance back to the car when it's all set up on the chassis. And for the wheel inserts, I've gone for these awesome 4-spoke Pendle Slot Racing Ford Escort RS inserts. They're beautiful, they really do look the business, and they'll look absolutely fantastic on this car. And the front guide, You've guessed it, it's my usual, very predictable, standard Slotting Plus guide, and Pendle Slot do these awesome little packs with everything we need in the pack. But like I've said many times before, I won't be using that 0.3 braid, although it's very good quality. I'll be using my ordinary 0.2 braid, which I personally find works better on these smaller and lighter cars. Now I want to sympathetically resto mod this particular Escort, and for that I need a fairly standard paint job that mimics the original car's release in the 70s and 80s, and for that I'm going to need some very period water slides. And Pendle Slot Racing do these beautiful period replacement water slides, and they are very high quality, and I should be using these to make the car look very stock. And as you can see, the colour is very saturated, they're very high quality, and these look absolutely fantastic on this body. Now, while it is true that all these parts here will make this car faster, smoother, more reliable and lighter, there is a set of parts that will really turn the handling of this car up to 11, and that is these. Now these are the parts that I actually make personally. So let's start with the vacuum formed interiors. Now these are incredibly light and will lose a huge amount of weight in the top of this car. So these only weigh about 2 grams a piece, and as you can see, I do it as a single driver and as a double driver. And also to complement the interiors, I also do the Lexan glass as well. Now this will shed all the weight out the roof of the car, and I'll get the roof down to about 1 gram of weight, and that's all there is in this glass. So just those components alone will transform this car's handling immeasurably. Also, I have this pack here. Now this pack contains the motor spacer, so we can fit our S-can motor into the chassis. It also contains the S-can brace, the brass tube to stiffen up the front axle, and also a pair of front axle spacers, and those spacers can be used with both sets of those wheels, the wide and the narrow. Also, I also sell 2mm lead. Now this can be used for any slot car, totally universal, and you can add and subtract as much of this as you want to your car. Bearing in mind, these cars really only like up to about 95 grams of weight, so don't go too mad with your lead. Okay, so now we have all of our parts. I think it's time to turn this car into something much more modern and much more capable on the track. So let's get to the bench and get all these parts into this car so that we can turn its performance right up to 11 or maybe even 12. Okay, so this is future Rob come back in the past with the power of editing and hindsight. So this body and chassis needs a little bit of work before we can start on it, or at least you may want to check yours, because I found that my body was a little bit twisted halfway through this build. So the way that we straighten out one of these bodies is to get some almost boiling water. So turn your kettle on, let it get to about 80% of where it needs to be to boil. Do not let it boil. Then once you've got your water up to about 80%, get yourself a nice bowl like this, where the body will fit completely into it like that. Pour water, the very hot water, level with the top of your bowl, and drop your body in. Leave it there for about 10 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds. Don't go mad. Take it out and just check to see if it's actually flexing and twisting. If it isn't, pop it back in for another 5 seconds, but it should be after 10 seconds. So then once you're happy that it is actually flexible, take it out the water, turn it around and put it onto your setup plate and make sure that it's flat. If it's not, just give it a little bit of a tweak and sort of over tweak it, pop it back on your setup plate and make sure that it's flat. And once you're happy that the chassis is, or the body is flat, so the sills or the rockers are absolutely level with the setup plate, you can take it to the cold water, holding it like this, and then pour cold water over it until it's all nice and cold. Once it's all dry, once it's all cold, take it off the plate, check it, pop it back on the plate, and you should find that the body will be completely level, just like that. So once you've got your body absolutely level, the next thing that I'd noticed in the future was that this chassis, when it clips in to the body, actually twists the chassis because it's under quite a lot of strain. So what we need to do is we need to relieve some edges. So we're going to relieve this edge here, a little bit across the back,
the top of that number plate holder, a little bit down these sides, a little bit here, a little bit here, and a little bit across the front, and potentially a little bit out the gullet of this front pin here. See, there's plenty of material here to eat into, so we're going to take a little bit away there. Also, what you might like to notice is that when the chassis is in the body, is very, very stiff. That's very, very stiff. There's no movement in there at all. So we do actually want a little bit of compliance. So that is why we want to take a little bit away from the top of that number plate, and potentially a little bit away from this slot here, just so that we can get a little bit of movement. So that's very easy to do. You just get yourself a simple file and just simply file away the chassis all the way around the edges until you've generated that clearance that I've just spoken about in all those areas. Okay, so I've spent a few minutes sorting out all these tolerances, so we've now got a little bit of movement in the chassis. So we've got a little bit of rock side to side. So I wonder if I can show you just there, which is exactly what we want. And we've also got a little bit of lateral movement there. Now, ultimately, we don't want lateral movement, but we can shim this back out later on in the build just by putting a little tiny bit of plastic card in the gullet of that hook there. Alternatively, you could put a little bit on the front of the car, but we'll come to that once all the wheels are in. So basically, what we've got clearance all around these edges, which has given us the float that we want. And because we've got a little bit of lateral movement, that actually means that this chassis is no longer under tension. And that was the problem when I did this the first time round, which is why I've had to come back in time to sort this out, because the chassis was under so much tension that I wasn't getting what I expected later on in the video. So I've had to come back. But now we've got a little bit of lateral movement. We now know that the chassis isn't bowed, and because we got a little bit of twist there, a little bit of rock, I now know that it's not being pressured in any one direction or another. So the areas that I spent a lot of attention on, obviously a little bit on the sides, and these corners were quite tight, and also these back corners here were quite tight. But I also spent a long time just thinning out the bottom below the number plate, just by simply putting a file underneath and just gently removing a little bit of that material just to get that a little bit thinner. And also I used the edge of my file to get underneath that hook there, right in the corner, just like this. And I just thinned out the gullet of that hook there, not too much, you don't want to go mad. And also it doesn't hurt to take off a little bit off the sides of that hook as well, possibly a little bit off the top. You don't need much, it's not a lot. We've still got a really good healthy hook there, but we just want to thin things down just a hair. Also, I actually took away a little bit of plastic on this opening here. Now, a little bit goes a long way, so you really don't want to be taking off too much. It's just to ease that hole so that the pressure of that hook isn't influencing twist on the chassis. And also the same on the rear number plate. You can simply put your file in there and just take out a few swipes. You don't need to go mad, because a little goes a long way. You only want a little tiny bit of body float. You don't want a lot. So when those are done, you end up with quite a nice fitting chassis. And like I say, we can come back to it later on and we can fine tune that lateral movement and tune that out with a little pad of plastic carb. A little tiny hint of movement is fine, but we don't want that much. But at least we now know that the chassis is not under twist. Now later on in this video, in a few minutes time, I'm going to give you a dimension for a drill that I put underneath the guide hole there as a packer. Now that number is going to change, and I'm going to try and do my best to edit it so that it's reasonably flowing. But bear in mind that number will change, so if I don't do a very good job on the editing, it'll be a bit clunky. Maybe I'll make it clunky anyway, just so that you know. Anyway, so now we've got our body all done, we can now move on to the video. So like I said at the beginning of the video, this is the sort of job that I think anybody in slot cars can do, no matter what your skill level. It's just a simple case of taking bolt-in parts and fitting it into the chassis. So with that in mind, I think the first bolt-in part will fit are these bearings. Now, I've had a little bit of experience with these bearings now since using the bearings in the Brabham, and I have found that the actual axle can start to rotate, or the bearing, sorry, can start to rotate in your chassis pocket holders there for the bearing if you have a bit of a bump with the back end. So I've developed a little system that I think might work to compensate for that. So if we pop the bearing into the housing first, and then get your axle and then guide it properly home with the axle, just like that. So now you can see that there's a little hole in the top, and that hole is at the top of that eccentric there. So you can stick a toothpick in this particular case in the hole, and you could actually turn it. So make sure that the eccentric bearing is nice and central in your chassis, and then do exactly the same to the other side. Just like that. Now pop the axle through the bearings, and you should find that they're perfectly lined up. Once you get to that position, this is the trick that I learnt. You can see that there's a small amount of brass on either side of that oiling hole. Scratch it with a very sharp craft knife so you get a nice bit of texturing on that brass, and then we're going to pop a little tiny bit of super glue into the groove between the bearing and the chassis, and that should stop the bearing from rotating, because the glue will grip to the brass and this little key that we're putting in here, and that should stop it from rotating within the housing. So we scratch that up, we pop a little bit of super glue on a surface, and then with this cocktail stick I'm going to drop a tiny drop of glue right in the corner, making sure that it doesn't go down that oiling hole, because that would be bad. And there we are. Now we'll leave that to set up, and once it's all nice and hard, we'll come back to fitting the rest of the parts. Okay, so some time has passed now and the super glue has set up nice and hard. I try not to put activator on super glue when I really want it to set really hard, because I find that the activator can make the super glue a little bit more brittle than usual. So we just let it go naturally and it'll harden up really well. So that's where we're at with that. So the next job, I think, would be to fit the pinion on the motor. Now, for those that don't know, pinions often have two sides to them. I'll show you. So we've got a heavily chamfered side on there, and on the other side it's a nice square flat. So I would fit the heavily chamfered side on the motor first, and I think that's basically there to guide the pinion down on the motor shaft nice and square. It gives you a good starting point. See, it's actually holding there more or less. And then we're going to use one of these nasty things to get the pinion on. Now I know these aren't the most accurate in the world, but it's what most people have got, so that's what we'll use. And we simply wind the pinion onto the motor. Just like that. Now we won't go all the way for a minute because we don't know how deep to fit that pinion. Next, we're going to take one of the parts from the pack that I actually produce, and that being the rear motor mount. So we'll take him and we'll pop him nice and tight on the back of the motor, making sure he's fully in. So that's our motor set up, ready to go. So next, I think what we'll do is we'll pop the rear pinion in. Make sure that you don't lose the grub screw, because the grub screws are often separate from the gear. So if we pop the axle into the bearings and then put the gear in, just loosely for now, eventually, there we are, like that, and it's all nice and free. And then we can offer up the motor and just see how far back we need to fit that pinion. Now I think that pinion needs to go a little bit more, so let's just take that off because that was in the way. Okay, so I would like that pinion to be a little bit more towards the back. It's perfect, but I want it to be smack bang in the middle of that gear. So as you can see then, I've actually gone a little bit too far on that pinion by a fraction. And again, for those that don't know, that's what this end of the tool is for. It's for removing pinions or just sliding them back. So I'm going to give it basically a half a turn back in the opposite direction, and that will have moved the pinion backwards slightly, and then I can reassess where I'm at And there we are. I'm much happier with that. That pinion is now falling smack bang in the middle of that gear. Now, the next problem that I can see is the actual end of the motor is really close to the boss of that gear just here. Now, I'd like to see a little bit of daylight between there. Now, the chances are there may be a fractional gap there in terms of light passing through. It may not be absolutely, I don't believe it is touching all that much, but I want it to clear properly. So here's a little trick that I use to just shorten the ends of motor shafts, and it's very easy. You simply use a battery and then you spin up the motor on the battery, and then you bring your Dremel onto the end of the motor just like this, and then you can grind a fraction off the end of that shaft. So let's just do that now. And there we are. So now we've got a shortened and polished motor shaft, all nice and square because we did it on the Dremel. Right, so now we've gotten that far, we can now pop the motor back into the chassis and just see if we got a little bit of daylight. And I don't know if you can see in the camera, but I do. There's a fraction of daylight between the end of that shaft and the boss of the gear. So I'm very happy with that now. So we can go ahead at this point and put the motor adapter back into the end of the motor, and then this can sometimes be a little bit of a trick, but I'm going to put one side in first, get the gear set up, put the other side in by spreading the chassis, and then clip it into place. And there we are. That is the back end all finished. So now we just need to think about fitting the wheels. Okay, so we're going to fit the back wheels so that we can use the wheels as a gauge to put the axle on top of these M5 nuts. So let's just pop these wheels on. Just like that. Now you want to push them up against the body because we don't need the width at the moment. So the next job is to place these nuts underneath that back axle, just to familiarize yourself with what's going on here. So we've got the back end lifted up on these M5 nuts. So the measurement across the flats of this M5 nut, if you need to know, is 7.9 millimeters. And then what we're going to do eventually is take this tube, put it on the axle. We're going to then put a wheel on each end of it, so we leave a little bit of axle sticking out. I'll just give it a nip up for a second. I'm just showing you this now, like that. And that will then ultimately sit in place just there. Let me just move that wheel a little bit more. It's not quite in the right place. Just move them out, just there. So that will sit in the chassis, just there, and then we're going to put the nuts underneath the bottom of that axle as well, and then we're going to take this
2.5 millimeters
drill, and we're going to put this drill underneath the front guide tube, just like that, ultimately when we're finished. And what we're doing here is we're triangulating the chassis based on the height of that front guide tube to the back axle. And then these M5 nuts are going to be gauging the height of that front axle, because we're going to be bonding in that front tube, and we want to end up with this scenario here. Now I've done all the maths for you, so you don't need to worry about working it out yourselves. Make sure that you put the drill all the way back, because there is a slight bend to that guide tube itself. It's a little bit higher, or lower should I say, at the front of the tube than at the back. I've just put a little picture just there, and you'll see what I mean. So make sure that you put the drill all the way back, and that will set the car up nice and level when the body is on, and you'll get the sills, or rockers if you're American, to run completely parallel then to the bottom of your setup plate here. But make sure also that you've got your setup plate set up backwards. You don't want the guide slot up this end, because it just gets in the way of the drill. So you want to turn it all around and get it all set up like this. Right, so now I'm going to quickly disassemble this, and I'll show you how we're going to fit that front tube into that chassis. Okay, so we're all stripped down and ready to go. So take a pair of side cutters, or you could even use a knife if you want to, and go right in to the side of that inner bulkhead just here. Now this is the thing that limits your axle in the actual the way it's normally set up, and we just want to take away the side of it because that is where our tube is going to be sitting, and with those pieces, as long as they are, they just get in the way a little bit. So you just want to come right in and just chop it off into a nice big V, and what we're looking for is we're allowing this axle tube to move freely wherever it needs to be. That's what we're aiming for. So let's just pop off the other side as well. Okay, so now we've got a nice big V on that side and a nice big V on that side, and the brass tube is free to drop in there, and then when we put the axle in, it can sit anywhere it wants to vertically in that pocket. They're there just like that. Right, so the next thing we want to do is we need to scratch up the bottom of the chassis right underneath where that tube is going, because we're going to put some car body filler in there, or Bondo. Okay, so it's all nicely scratched up, and also make sure that you get all the plastic out from those inner bulkheads all the way down to the bottom on both sides. So basically what you want to end up with is a nice free floating axle, so it can rise up and down, and that tube is completely free to seat where it wants to seat. So once you've done that and you've got that all nice and free, then you want to take your tube and you want to scratch the tube up as well with a file or a piece of very rough sandpaper, just like this. Okay, so you've got your tube all roughed up, ready to go. So now what we want to do is mix up a little bit of Bondo or car body filler and put a nice big dollop right in that front trough. Okay, so once you've got your filler all mixed up, you want to very carefully drop it between those 2 points on your chassis and just move it around until it's exactly where you want it. Try and keep it nice and neat. And you want to sort of make it flow and manipulate it around those 2 points just like that. Once you've got a nice little dollop like so, you want to grab your front axle. Actually, it'd probably be better off just to screw this wheel on at this point, wouldn't it? So pop the wheel on. There we are, just like that. And then pop the axle into the chassis so the tube is not being clogged up on the ends, and then clip your front axle in like that so it's still free to move, and then you can top up with a little bit of filler on the top of it. Just go over the top again, making sure that it doesn't go down into the tube. We don't want it to go down into the tube, and we can just move it over just like that. And if you agitate the filler a little bit, it kind of settles down and it makes a nice neat job. And I think that'll work for now. We can always clean it up afterwards. So once you've got to that stage, you simply want to put these M5 nuts underneath all 4 axles and up against those wheels, so the wheels kind of hold them in place. Again, on the front just there, and the other side up against the wheels, and then slip your thrill right underneath the middle of your guide. So some time has passed now and my filler is dry, so it's time now to take off all the wheels, clean up that filler and put a little bit of black paint on it. Okay, so now we're at the point where all the tyres are trued and they're all exactly the same diameter. You can go ahead and you can take out the front axle spacers in the pack that I supply. And you'll notice there's a large side and a small side. Now the large side is if you use the standard rear tyres on the front, and the whole spacer is if you use these 6mm wide ones on the front. You can simply go ahead and slide the spacer onto the axle. And if you wanted to trim down the small side, if you are fitting the big tyres, you simply get a scalpel blade, put it up against that shoulder and push hard, and the smaller side will simply cut away from the main piece, and you'll just be left with a larger portion, and then you'd slide that on exactly the same way as you do for these narrower wheels. So all we need to do now is just pop the axle in, pop the other spacer on. It doesn't really matter which side you put it on, really. Okay, so that basically concludes the fitment of the chassis and most of its parts. So the only thing that's left to do now is to fit the front guide and trim down the axles. So let's start with the guide. So if you don't have one of my reaming tools for the Slotting Plus guide, it's no huge big deal, because the guide goes in and it's actually a reasonable fit in the original Scalextric's hole. However, if you do have one of my fitting kits, then you can simply scratch up a piece of the supplied tube and then drill a 4.1mm hole through the existing guide holder tube, like that, and then put a small amount of super glue onto the plastic tube, like that, a very small amount, and then with one swift movement push the tube in to position like that, and then with a scalpel trim off the excess like that, and then you're free to ream the guide holder until it fits the guide. And there you are, that's the fitment of the guide completed. Absolutely rock solid in the car, yet incredibly free to turn. And if we do the old paintbrush trick on it, you can see how free that is. It's also free to rise and fall, just like that. And you can see there's absolutely rock solid in that car. It's going absolutely nowhere. So the next job is to fit a spacer. Now in this particular case, we can get away with using the thinnest of these two spacers that come with the guide. So that is just a simple case of snipping it off the tree and fitting it to the guide itself, and just seeing where we're at once we've fitted our braid. With regards braid, I'm using this 0.2 NSR pre-tinned braid, like I said before. Okay, so now we've got the guide all made up with the braid and wire all fitted. It's now time to think about getting the front of the car set up with regards to the spacer that we put on that guide. So if we put the whole guide down in place so it's absolutely against the bottom of the car and lower it onto the setup plate, you'll notice that the front tyres are still off the deck. So what we need to do is we need to take that shim off the guide and sand that shim down until those front tyres are just about touching the setup plate. Okay, so I've adjusted that spacer so that the guide is in the perfect position where the front tyres are incredibly free to turn on the setup plate and also roll with the chassis, and that's exactly what we want with that guide with the braids fitted. However, I've spotted an issue. With these wires in the guide with their little ferrules on, the wires are actually touching the top of the chassis. So what I'm going to have to do is just remove these braids and chop down those little lugs on the top of the guide so that they no longer hit the top of the chassis when I've got the wires in. So it's really just a simple case of trimming them down with a scalpel blade until I clear them nicely, and it cuts quite easily like this with a scalpel. There isn't really a huge problem, it's just a minor inconvenience, but it's better than gouging great big holes in your chassis. So I shall just trim these down now, and I shall come back to you when I've done that job. Oh, I love how these projects keep on throwing me curveballs. So as you can see, I've had to strip the insulation all the way back to expose the top of those ferrules to get a really low profile wire. Now with that low profile wire, I'm able to fit the guide into the chassis, and I got myself some clearance, And then when I put the car on the setup plate, move the back tyres, the front tyres are free to turn. They're also very, very free to slip on the setup plate as well. And that's exactly where we want the guide to be. So all we've now got to do is screw the guide in using its supplied screw, just like that. Bring up these wires over the top of the chassis and then solder them to the motor. So that's the fun of making these projects. Sometimes they can throw you a couple of curveballs, and in the case of this chassis, it was the extreme flexing once the chassis was put in the body that needs to be sorted out, and also the height of this guide just wasn't quite low enough to get underneath that chassis without having to modify the chassis, and I didn't really want to go to that extreme. So anyway, we're there now, we're done. So hopefully you followed this video and it all makes sense to you so far and I haven't confused you. So now we can move on to the lead. Now for the lead, I sell these nice handy packs, and from one of those packs I've taken this strip. Now I've already done the workings out, and adding weight is always a little bit of a stab in the dark, so this may or may not work on the track, but I think we're going to be close, and we should get this whole car up to about 90 grams with this lead in it the way I'm going to do it now. Now 90 grams should be about right. I don't think we're going to have any major problems in either direction with 90 grams. I think we're going to be there or thereabouts, but if I do need to adjust the weight, I will tell you at the end of the video after we've done the track run. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set our digital caliper to approximately 8 millimeters. Now I'm going to do what all engineers cringe at, and that's I'm going to drag the edge of this caliper down this lead, but it is only lead, so we're not actually putting any serious strain on this caliper at all, and we're just going to scribe 2 8mm lines down there. Then we're going to set the caliper to 66 millimeters, more or less, which is approximately there. Actually no, we're not, we're going to go a little bit longer, I think, because I've got a plan. So let's go 68 more or less, and then we're going to strike a line across. Once we've done that, we can then chop out the lead on those lines with a pair of tin snips. Like that, and as you saw, I've just flattened it out on my table. I'll cut the other one out after the event. Now what we're going to do is we're going to roll this end up here about 4 times, because we're going to fit it right into that little pocket there, and then up and over this bulkhead, and then run it down the side of the chassis. So for that, I've got myself a very small pair of pliers. They're not particularly special pliers, they're just small pliers, and we're going to take about 4 to 5 millimeters of material just there, and then we're going to fold it around to just beyond 90 degrees, and then with a larger pair of pliers we can come in and fold it the rest of the way and get it nice and tight, just like that. Then we're going to repeat the process again, making sure that you keep the tops of those bends all nice and even, and if you go slightly out as you're bending it, no problem, you can just tweak it in again and then get it all nice and squared up, and then compress it again reasonably tight. Don't crush it to death, you just want to just compress it, and then we're going to do it once more, just like that. So now we've got all those little folds there, and then we're going to do it once more, but with the difference. So I've got this pair of tweezers here, and the thickness of that bar there is about 1.5 millimeters. So I'm going to put that up against the side, and then I'm going to bend the top of that over the top of that tweezer. Now I'm not going to crush it too much because I don't want to make it too tight, because that's the bit that's got to go over the bulkhead in the chassis. So we should end up with something along those lines like this, and we can always square it up as well if we're a little bit off. And then I'm going to pop my ordinary pliers back in, and I'm going to fold it back again to that sort of shape like that. So we got a load of folds and a little return. So I'm going to see if I can just manipulate that a little bit more, make this bottom edge quite square. So along the lines of something like that. That should be close. So I give it a bit of a tweak. So there we are. So we got something looking a bit like that. Now hopefully that is going to fit in there. Now as you can see, it doesn't. So what we want to do is take a little bit of sandpaper and just gently sand the edge of this lead just to thin it down. Now be careful when you're sanding lead, because obviously lead is bad for your health. Put a mask on or do this outside. Basically don't breathe this lead dust, because it's really not a good idea. And hopefully if you sanded it down enough, that should fit into that chassis, something along the lines of that, just like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to mark the end of this chassis here, and we're going to, actually no we're not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend that up. Actually, another little change of plan actually, because I keep a little bit of lead in this, have some options. So if I just bend that 90 degrees like that, then I should be able to just lower that down. There we are. Lower that down, push it nice into the chassis, and we end up with a really nice fitting piece of lead that runs the whole length with a little bit of bias at the end and that extra little bit up the front. So what we're going to do now, we're going to repeat that process. I'm going to pop it on the other side, and then we can move on to fitting the motor bracket. So now we've got the lead duplicated on the other side of the chassis, we can go ahead and fit the last piece of this fittings pack that I sell for this car, that being the motor bracket. So the way we're going to fit that is slide it up underneath those wires and all the way to the back of the motor and right into the corner of that folded piece of lead on both sides. Then with a small drill, you can use a battery or manual, take a 1.8mm drill and put the hole through the hole that's actually already in the motor bracket there, and just keep winding in until you go all the way through the lead and the plastic chassis. Just like that, and repeat on the other side. Just like that. So once you've got your 1.8mm drill chased all the way through, you then want to change the 1.8mm drill to a 2.3mm drill and repeat the process, but this time only in the lead and the chassis. Just like that. Now what I like to do as well is put a little tiny deburr on the bottom of those main holes there, and the way that I do that is I do it with a slightly larger drill, and very lightly just skim it across the surface of that hole, and that will deburr those holes beautifully, just like that. So once we've got our holes all in the chassis, let's give it a bit of a blow off. You can put the motor bracket back in place like that, and then with the screws that came in the fittings pack, you can then screw the motor bracket in place using those little self-tapper screws. Don't go mad, you don't need to go crazy with this. Just find the thread and nip it up, and it will just touch on the top of that hole. Do the same for the other side. And there we are, that's snugged down the motor bracket perfectly. It's holding the lead in place and the motor in place. And then we can just reroute the wires around the top of that bracket like that. And what I'm going to do is put a little bit of thread on those wires just to hold them together nicely in the middle of the car, so we've got a nice amount of spring on the front guide and it's not pulling the wires too tight. So now we can concentrate on getting the body to fit the chassis. And one thing I've noticed is that this particular casting has quite a lip on the inside of the wheel arch. Also, these wheel arches are quite thick where we don't want them to be thick really, and we want maximum width on all four corners of this car to give us maximum stability. So the way that I'm going to achieve a wider profile on the width of the car is to simply trim away the inside of those arches with a scalpel very carefully. You can also do this with a Dremel, but it's quite easy to go too mad with the Dremel, and we're really only concentrating on the tops of those arches. And what we want to do is get rid of that mold line obviously, and also thin out the top of that arch so that it's not going to interfere with the tyre when the body is sat on the chassis. So we're looking for something like that where it's a lot thinner but not too thin. We can go as close as you dare, but don't go too close. I think we'll go a little bit more. So there we are, we got it about there now. That is nice and thin but not coming through to the outside of the body. So repeat that on all four corners. and a quick inspection, I think that is about right. So I think that's cleared it for the wheel arches. So the next job we need to do is take out that lateral movement that I said we had at the beginning of the video. So we do really want to start off with a little bit of lateral movement because it gives us somewhere to go later on in the build. So I'm going to just take a little bit of this 0.5mm plastic card. I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to glue that right on the inside of this chassis just here, because the chassis wants to come back, not forward, so we'll be safe to put it on the front rather than the back. So I'm simply just going to put a little dot of super glue on the front of that body, just run the super glue along that edge there, and then take my piece of plastic card that I've just cut, and we're going to pop it right on there, level with the bottom of that gullet. Just make sure it's nice and flat. We should end up with something like that, and then we can test fit the chassis and see where that gets us. Okay, so your mileage may well vary depending on how much you filed away on the chassis at the beginning of this build, but for me that 0.5mm packer is absolutely perfect. There's almost no forwards and backwards movement at all in that chassis. There's just the hint of it. I can feel it, but you can't see it. But I've also still got all my very nice float for the body, so the body is nice and free, and the forward and backwards movement of the chassis is absolutely perfect. So that's the chassis all married up to the body perfectly, and all the wheels seating in the arches, and I've got good clearance. So I've already gone ahead and worked out how much too long these axles are, because this is the last job to do. I didn't want to cut the axles too short because we don't quite know how far out we can actually get those wheels, and it turns out that I can get them out to 52mm on the back, and on the front they come out a little bit shorter at about 50mm just there. You could probably eke a little bit more out the front if you really wanted to. There's a little bit of clearance there, but I do like to keep things a little bit clearancy. Otherwise, when you go into a corner, if the front wheel binds, it's a bit like slamming your brakes on in the middle of the corner, especially if the body moves over like that. It will just sort of lock up the front wheel, and it will tend to make the car skid. So 50mm on the front is absolutely great. 52 on the back is absolutely great as well. So we want to lose about 10mm off the end of each of those axles, and I will show you how I actually remove my axle material, and it's very, very simple. So I'm just going to liberate this front axle here. So I have my front axle liberated, and I know that I want to remove approximately 10mm of material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my caliper at 10mm, put my thumbnail there, put a little mark, and then come back and double check, and I'm about 1mm short. So I'm going to get some tape, and there we are, it's convenient, and I'm going to put it on the axle about 1mm short, and then put the tape around, and then double check, and there we are. So about 0.5mm difference there now, which is fine. I just to make a mental note of that. And then I'm going to put the axle in my electric drill and lock it off nice and tight, and then simply cut it off with a Dremel. And there you are, that's the front axle all perfectly cut and ready to reinstall back into the front of the car. Now I should do exactly the same to the rear axle, then reinstall that one, and then I shall move straight on to painting the body. Okay, so I thought it'd be a really good time to stop that little montage and just show you all these parts before we're on the home straight to getting this car finished. Now let's start with the chassis. As you can see, I've turned those leads down. It's shifted the centre of gravity back by a couple of mil, which isn't very much, but more the point, it's lowered the centre of gravity because I'm pretty sure I want to keep all that lead there, and having them sticking up in the air is unnecessary. So I've folded them down nice and flat. You'll also notice that I've painted the front valance body colour white when I painted the body, because it's not supposed to be black, it's supposed to be body colour. And also, a subscriber noticed in my retro power video that the wires had changed from the blue that came with the kit to black, and all I did was actually paint the bottom of the wires the same as I've done with this car here. Now I don't normally mention that in my videos because I don't really feel it's worth mentioning, but someone did notice it, so I thought I'd point it out. So yeah, so I've used red wire with the Pendle slot kit, and because it's seen at the front of the car, I painted it black, which is something I do quite often, so there's a little trick to do there. So with regard to the body, all I've done to that is I've painted the interior. So you don't need to go any further than that because the interior covers everything that you can see there and no more, so that is absolutely all you need to do. And the glass, so what I've done with the glass is I've chopped off the 90-degree return around the bottom, and I've chopped the bottom of the glass down to about 2 millimeters, just a lip across the front there and a lip across the front there, and then just chamfered the edges. And if you can see, there's an F in the top of the roof. Now that obviously signifies front. So what I like to do when I'm fitting my glass is I like to hold the glass in with some silver foil tape. And a little trick to that is if you put the tape down on the surface and peel off the paper on the back, you don't actually get the silver foil rolling up and making an absolute mess of itself when you're trying to get the backing off. So if you hold it with the tweezers like that, if I can get the tweezers to hold, that is, these aren't playing the game, absolutely aren't playing the game, like that. Hold it with your nail, and then you can roll off the paper, and you end up with the silver foil tape nice and flat. This little trick. So if you put your silver foil tape just about 3 mil from the bottom of that glass and just stick it down like that, do exactly the same to the other side, just like that. You can then simply drop your interior straight in, or your glass straight in. So then manipulate the front so it's nice and tight to the roof. Hold it with your 2 fingers and do the same to the back. Just hold it with your 2 fingers like that. And then with a little finger or a spare finger, just make sure that that silver foil tape touches the sides, and you can do the same on the other side. Don't go mad, you don't have to press it wildly hard because it grips really well. And then get yourself a cotton earbud and then just wipe just like that, and it makes a super neat job, and it pushes the silver foil tape nice and tight against the glass. So once you've got your glass in and looking very neat like that, the interior is just a simple case again of chopping off all of the 90-degree material across the sides, chopping off most of the front ends like that, and obviously most of the back end. Now what I've done here is I've cut a notch at the front, and I've stopped it about 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters before the dashboard, and I've just folded what's left just up into a little flap. And then once you've got that, you can lock it into the body on the front. You can drop the back end down and just wiggle the body around, and the rear post will make a mark on the parcel shelf, and then you can just chop out a slot to match. And once you've done that, you can simply then hook the front in like that, drop in the back end and simply clip it in, and that is it. It'll absolutely stay there with no problems at all, and it'll look absolutely fantastic. So that's a really easy way of getting your interior in to stay. Now if you want a little bit of extra security, you can cut some more silver foil tape, and you can put your silver foil tape in like that on the front to cover up those little points at the front there, and you can also put a little bit in the back just like that as well, and that will lock in your interior completely if you don't want to just rely on these little tabs if maybe you've got the position a little bit wrong. So that basically takes care of the interior and the glass. Now moving on, fun seals. I'd like to give a big thanks to Dave at Slot R for pointing out these fun seals, and also Tom Lee RC, who Dave got the idea from as well. So I followed that up as well, and I found them to be absolutely brilliant. So I was using these Molotow silver pens when I had the opportunity to use them. Now the chrome itself on these Molotow pens is very good, but it's not very strong. It's almost like it never dries, and when you wipe it, it all comes off very, very easily. So not wildly impressed with those. However, these fun seals, as Dave said and Tom Lee said, they are really, really good. So you got a fat end and a thick end, and exactly as Dave said, they work extremely well. And I've done a little bit of chrome work on this bumper, just to add a little bit of chrome back on, and that's gone really, really well. And I've also gone around the edge of this grill, because the chrome had been lost around the edge of that grill, and I'm very, very happy with it. The chrome is very strong, it's not wanting to wipe off with my finger, and it's done a really good job. It doesn't bleed like the funs, like the Molotow as well. It seems to stay where you put it, which is great. Now these are the rear view mirrors that I also make. Now these are the 3mm ones. If you recall, on my Brabham build I used the 2.75mm. Now these are the 3mm ones, and I made these because they're a better fit on a full-size car than a small racing car. So these work out to be about 4 inches in scale, which is roughly what you would get on a full-size car. Now on these rear view mirrors here, I've painted the top two in ordinary silver with a little bit of gloss on them, and I've done the bottom two with the fun seals. And I think you'll find the bottom two are much more pleasing to the eye. They've got a much better chrome to them, and obviously being a slightly thicker paint, any 3D lines that are printed covers them up, and you really don't see them at all. So I'm going to be fitting these 3mm rear view mirrors right now, and if you want to buy a pair of these, there's a little picture just there associated on my website with these. But the way that I fit these is simply to take myself a very fine drill. It's a 0.7 drill, this one, very, very sharp. And what I'll do is I'll drill a hole with the 0.7 exactly where I want it, and that initiates the first hole. Then once I've done that, I'll then come through and use a 1.3mm drill, and I'll just lock that in there, and then I can just gently open up that original hole to 1.3mm, and that will accept these little rear view mirrors perfectly. So once we've done that, I think we're on the home straight. So let's crack on, let's do a quick little montage, let's get this all buttoned up, and then we can go and hit the track.
I have to say, I didn't know what to expect from this car at the beginning of this video. I thought maybe 55, 54 seconds maybe, but a 50.9 from a 50-year-old car. I'm absolutely over the moon with that. And this car drives so nicely. It doesn't want to slide out particularly. It doesn't want to roll over particularly. It gives you loads of advanced warning when it goes into a corner. It's a little bit sideways. You can back off a little bit or just teeter it around and it'll go around really smooth. It's absolutely fantastic handling car. And the thing is, it did a 51.5 consistently straight off the bench. So straight off the bench, straight onto the track, ran with no issues whatsoever and was returning 51 somethings repeatedly over and over again. And then at the last time I ran the car, it pulled out that 50.9. Maybe I was trying a little bit harder, not quite sure, but it was so smooth and it's such a nice car to drive. In honesty, it's probably one of my nicest cars that I've got that's not a sub 50-second car, and I didn't have to fight it for that time. And say off the bench, she came off at 94 grams in the end. So I was aiming for 90 grams, but 95 is fine. So 94, that's where she ended up. Absolutely spot on. I have no issues with the weight distribution on this car. Didn't need to go back into the chassis and tweak it. Didn't need to do anything to it. And I must be honest, if I didn't have got the fastest time that I did, I was going to take a leaf out of Dave Slotter's book and I was going to put a little bit of oil on the back of those tyres. Now I do actually have racing oil. I don't know why I didn't bother to use it, because I do club racing and we use the oil there. So why I'd never thought about using it myself, I don't know. But credit to Dave for reminding us all that we do have that option, but I didn't need to use it for this car. So I'm really happy. So if you want any of these parts that I've used in this car, see Pendle Slot Racing. And if you want any of the parts that I've made for this car, see my website. All the links are below. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this content, and if you have, maybe you'll subscribe, and if you could hit the little bell button, that would be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.